Shalom, my friends. Shalom, my enemies. This is your old pal, Rabbi Sol Solomon, founder and spiritual leader of Temple Sons of Bitches in Great Neck, New York. And I'm talking to the chest of a journalist that has been on this program back in 2007. His name is John K. Hartman, a.k.a. Jack Hartman. Let me tell you a little bit about this man, if I can just find the thing here. He does have really nice nostrils there. If we could just tilt the camera a little better. There we go. Much better. He is a writer for the ColumbusFreePress.com. More importantly, he's an emeritus journalism professor. He got a doctorate in communication from Bowling Green University. He wrote 2 books about the USA Today way. It's not really about the USA Today newspaper. He's in the Central Michigan University Hall of Fame, so he has all sorts of thoughts, all sorts of ideas about where journalism is and where it's going in 2022 and beyond. So we welcome most delightfully back to the neighborhood, Jack Hartman. Shalom, Jack. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. How about you?
Oh, thank God. I'm good. Well, besides my prostate and besides that, I've got a nose hair that no matter what I do, I can't. It's in there. I pluck, I shave, nothing. I have to get hedge trimmers at a certain point. How are you?
I'm doing great. How about you? What a pleasure after 15 years.
I know. Well, you didn't even talk to me. You talked to Dave, who is
okay.
host of this program. I am Rabbi Sol. Now, you're not. What? If I may ask, since I'm being journalistic here and I'm digging, what religion are you?
Methodist.
I'm so glad I asked that question. Methodist, I've never heard that before.
Well, the Methodist Church is trying to split into the a gay-friendly division and the not friendly toward gay division. But I'm not making that up.
No, I had no idea.
Yes.
Which division are you in?
Oh, I would be in the gay-friendly division.
Oh, okay.
I
know this. No. Okay. Mazel. Are you happy or are you just regular, or what's your, or do I, what, or no, what? Ha! What am I saying here? I don't even know what I'm saying. Are you a gay person yourself, or are you just?
No. I'm just a straight guy.
Good for you.
Just a straight guy.
Bless your heart. Are you married? I don't even know.
Yes. Only 54 years.
Mazel McGlick, how did you meet your wife? This question you're affected by, the other question is not.
You will not believe the answer.
Okay.
Church camp. Methodist summer church camp. I was all of 14 and she was all of 12. I'm not making it up.
No, this is lovely. This is like a Jerry Lee.
It was at a lovely lake called Lake Piedmont, which is about 125 miles east of Columbus.
Lake Piedmont. I've done that. I've peed in Lake Piedmont.
Yeah. And that's how it all began.
Mit Mazel. And so all these years later, married youngins.
Oh yes, we have three grown-up daughters. They're the delights of our life. They're all highly successful professional people with great husbands, 7 grandchildren.
Oh, Mit Mazel, you're populating the earth. This is so good.
Everybody's we're very lucky people. We've had big, long, fulfilling lives, and
now you Jack Hartman, you have had a fulfilling life in journal. I mean, if I were a college professor, if I were a guidance counselor, I don't know if I would tell a kid, "Oh, get a journalism degree. Oh, get into investigative journalism or entertainment journalism." Sure, maybe, but how you got lucky, sort of, or not? How would you say?
Here's the thing. When I was a professor at Central Michigan, for which I was there for 31 years, I would have students come in and they would say, well, my parents want me to go into a field where I'm going to make a lot of money. Okay. And I would say, well, that's nice, but what do you want to do with your life? Well, not necessarily what all the parents wanted them to do to make money. And so then I would say, well, then you better be good at if you're not doing what your parents think you should do, then you better be pretty darn successful at it. And then you won't have any problem. If you fall flat on your face, then they'll then they'll say, I told you so. But I was very lucky. My parents never said, we want you to go out and make a lot of money. My parents wanted me to do what I was interested in. And when I was growing up, I was a big sports fan and I loved to play sports, but it wasn't that good except in tennis, which I still play today. My dad kind of guided me into becoming a sports writer. And so I went off to college to become a sports writer. And about halfway through college, I started reading the front page before the sports page, and that's kind of continued ever since then. But I went into journalism because that's what I wanted to do. That's what I was interested in.
But back then, it was a real. It wasn't
Yeah.
okay. It's not doctor lawyer, but you could make there were jobs.
Yeah, there were jobs. It didn't pay that well 50 years ago. Journalism did not pay that well. Newspapers hadn't quite hit the heyday, but after a while, pay got better, and I was 5 years as a copy editor at the Toledo Blade newspaper, and then in 1984, and I joined the faculty of Central Michigan University, and I took a $15,000 a year pay cut because that's what I ultimately wanted to do.
That's academia for you.
I wanted to be a journalism professor. That was my ultimate goal because, I wanted to stay in journalism, but I also wanted the freedom to be involved in politics. And there's no more freedom than being a tenured journalism professor in the world, at least back then. Today, not so sure.
Yeah, no, today not so. So wait, what stand did you take 30 or 20 years ago as a professor where you was like, okay, I may be on an unpopular position here, but I'm taking this stand and.
Yeah, well, the president of Central Michigan University 30 years ago was not exactly my favorite. And, and it's hard to think kindly of someone that wants to liquidate everything but the business department and the athletic department. And so I used to denounce him at the beginning of class every day.
Wait.
I denounced him at the beginning of class every day, and I got away with it.
Different. I got it. So, wow.
I couldn't do that today. You couldn't do that today. I had a colleague at Central Michigan who was fired because he quoted 8 seconds of a trial transcript that contained inflammatory racist rhetoric, and he was not calling people names. He was explaining how sometimes unsavory things, freedom of the press, freedom of speech allows unsavory things to be said and unsavory things to be reported. And he got fired.
How long ago was that?
This is in the last 3 years.
That makes sense.
It was in the last 3 years. So everybody's afraid of everything. People are afraid of speaking out.
Wow.
You know what?
I'm going to say shit, fuck, tuchus, just because I can.
Exactly right.
Say it
exactly.
Shit.
Exactly. I'll pass. I got grandchildren might be listening.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Not that they haven't heard those words. They probably have.
They heard them from me, I'm sure.
But not from me. No.
Let me ask you, though. In your years as a writing journalist, as an investigative person,
right,
as a writer, is there an article or series of articles that you are most proud of that you're like, this was my heyday?
Well, you see, most of my writing was done 50 years ago. I was the sports editor of a newspaper in Ohio. It was actually my hometown, the Ashland Times-Gazette. When I was at the Toledo Blade, I was a copy editor, so I wasn't doing investigative journalism at the time. But skipping to more recently, since I started writing for the Columbus Free Press, which is a progressive newspaper, now a website in Columbus, Ohio, almost 7 years ago, I wrote a series of articles, including a very long, in-depth article about a man by the name of Tom Noe, who was from Toledo. I knew him because we lived in Bowling Green for 34 years until we moved down to the Columbus area here 13 years ago. Anyway, he was a coin dealer, and he got in some trouble because he sold the state of Ohio on investing state money in coins. And he was very involved in politics, and he had some enemies, and he might have been a little bit arrogant Anyway, he got sent to jail for 20 years. And I thought, wait a minute, 20 years in jail for white collar crime? That's not right. That's not fair. That's not the American justice system. And it really was because he had ticked off both political parties and the publisher of the Toledo Blade. And so they wanted to punish him for other things. So I wrote this article about, free Tom Noe. And it had the most hits of any article I've written for the Columbus Free Press. It was in the hundreds of the number of people that read it. I got all kinds of comments and so on and so forth. And I wrote the governor, several times and so on and so forth. And of course, Tom Noe and I come from different political parties, but to me, it's not a political issue. It's a humanistic issue. It's a common sense issue. You don't put someone in. Nobody was, money was lost, but nobody was personally injured. You know what I'm saying? It was just was white collar crime. That's all it was. Well, COVID got Tom Noe paroled in the middle of COVID a year and a half ago, and the prisons were in Ohio were bastions of COVID and everything, and he got paroled.
After how many years? How long was he in?
Oh, the better part of 12 years.
Oh, so
better part of 12 years, yeah. Wow. And he got paroled, and in the process of it, I got to know his sister. I got to know other people, that were interested in this topic. And now Tom and his wife subsequently got married after he was released. We're Facebook friends. And hopefully, they have an open invitation. They live in the Toledo area. When they come to Columbus, we'll go to dinner. So that was probably the most impactful article and topic that I ever worked on. And I'm very proud of the outcome.
Probably helped on some.
But I still don't agree on political issues with my friend Tom Noe.
But I'll bet you, even though it didn't. See, nowadays, if you want to release somebody from prison, you got to get a documentary done. You get a movie on Netflix, then they get out. Then they get a new trial.
Right. Yeah. So, it was hard to create sympathy for a middle or upper class white man too.
Wow. That if you said that in class, you would be fired tomorrow.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly right. But let's not get too deep into that subject because I might say something I regret.
You're a journalist. We're free, quote unquote.
Well,
what we want, quote unquote.
One of the highlights of my career, which to many of your viewers and listeners may be a regrettable low light, but I was a visiting professor at King Saud University in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia in 2008, 2009, 2010 for 2 weeks each time. Okay, they invited me. Interestingly enough, they invited me because of my expertise about the newspaper USA Today, because this particular professorship was sponsored by one of the newspapers in Riyadh. And that newspaper's competitor was copying the techniques of USA Today. So they wanted me to bring me over to teach them how they could, what USA Today was up to and so on and so forth. But of course, as someone who's, accustomed to speaking freely, my wife and 3 daughters were petrified that the old man would go over to Saudi Arabia and say something untoward and, clink. That's the last we would ever see of them. So
like a North Korean incident, yeah.
That was kind of, and I was on television interviews and different things where people said horrible things to me, and I just kind of sloughed it off. But I went over there to try to help the Saudi young men and women learn about journalism. That was my purpose.
What was the most important thing you taught them in a country like Saudi Arabia? Because in America now, journalism isn't that free anymore. So what could you teach them in Saudi Arabia that they could actually institute?
Well, that's an excellent question because, of course, there's lots of things you can't say in Saudi Arabia. And certainly the citizenry knows that. Yet there is some liberalization going on in Saudi Arabia. Women getting some rights.
Which things, by the way. I like women, but you know,
Well, yeah,
quite as
you
many
know, I
girls.
mean, there was just an opportunity, I think, more than anything else, was just an opportunity to model to them what a journalist is like and model to them what the practices of journalism in the United States are.
Hmm.
Getting things right, being fair, all those kinds of things.
Fair. I don't think American journalism has been fair for a very long time.
Well,
Decided
no,
that.
but it tries to be fair. A lot of places try to be fair. I mean, the New York Times tries to be fair. It lapses every now and then. Wall Street Journal tries to be fair. I mean, if you read both publications and understand that each has a particular bias, particularly regarding particular subjects, but if you read them both, you can become a very, very well informed individual. So.
Have you been
It,
keeping up on the Yiddish newspapers, the Forward, the Allgemeine Journal?
Not very familiar with them. No,
No.
sorry to say not.
So
Are they well read in the Jewish community? I mean, are they still well read, or are they losing?
they're still out there. You know, I read them every day. So
Yeah.
that's,
How about
so
the younger generation? See, the younger generation doesn't read newspapers. They have no interest in ink on paper. They will read stuff online. But when a newspaper goes online, when a newspaper is dropped on your doorstep, it's a very unique product. There's a very few newspapers out there. So when the newspaper is dropped on your doorstep, it's a very unique product. When a newspaper comes to you through the internet, it's just one of hundreds of thousands of things you can read on the internet. So while people might sit and read the print newspaper for 15 minutes on a daily basis and maybe a half an hour on Sunday, they might spend 35 seconds with it on a particular day, and then they jump on to another subject.
also
And they
back in
don't
the
go
day,
and they don't
yeah.
read the newspaper by going directly to the newspaper website. They're referred to it by the Drudge Report, by Daily Co's, by different bundlers and aggregators, by Mark Halperin's newsletter, by other
Right. Well, also,
sources.
I
So
mean,
they just go and they read the article, and then they jump back to the source from which they got the article, which is not the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal.
as opposed to that old-fashioned thing of you get the thing in front of you, you flip the whether you be interested or not, you're glancing at the headline of some story that had to be written
Right.
because it is news. You wouldn't even see that or look at that anymore. But if it's in front of you on the let me see the first paragraph of that. If I'm not that interested, but I read the first paragraph, I kind of know what's going on. Move on.
Right.
Oh, this I want to read. This I don't want to read. And
Right.
then the naked girl on page 6. Okay.
Uh, well, see, when most people, when I was growing up, most people got the daily newspaper in a community, and so even though they might have been getting the daily newspaper because they wanted to read the sports pages, or they might have been getting the daily newspaper because they wanted to read the want ads or the car ads or something. The reason they were getting the daily newspaper could have been any number of things, or they liked the news carrier and they wanted to help him out by buying the paper from him. But then you would get the newspaper and it would have things of general interest on the front page. And if you just leaf through the newspaper, as you were saying, you might notice something that you wouldn't have ordinarily noticed. So you were getting general information about your community, about things you should know about, things you should be interested in from that newspaper, even if you just glanced at the front page on your way to the sports pages. Now we have people who, by and large, do not, and that was a systematic way of finding out about your community. Now we don't have a systematic way of
No,
finding
it's
out
almost
about our
actually
community.
in some ways the reverse. It's sort of like you know what you like, and
Correct.
everything coming to you has been filtered in only what you think you already know you're interested in.
Right. Yeah. And now you can devote your life to you're interested in quarter horse racing. You can spend your whole life doing nothing but reading about, watching videos about, learning about, attending quarter horse racing. You don't have to pay attention to, the
I think it's
Russians
horrible.
massed outside of, massed next to Ukraine. You don't have to pay attention to politics. You don't have to pay attention to your spouse, for Christ's sakes. I
And
mean,
why they
it's,
would chop horses into 4 bits and race one part of it.
well, that's
Actually,
another,
race the entire
yeah, I think
horse.
that's a video game. I think you're getting it confused with a video game.
Now,
Grand Central Horseman, I think is what it's called.
Now, because I can't believe how quickly the time has gone, but while we still have you, one of the things that you are het up about is what's going on with Gannett. So, in a briefish sort of a way, what's going on with Gannett?
They're liquidating the newspapers and they're going to all digital. They have moved the deadlines. They bought the Columbus paper about 7 years. It was bought by Gatehouse, and then Gatehouse became Gannett, took over Gannett. But they're liquidating the paper. The deadline is about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so there's no sports news. There's no breaking news in the newspaper. They're running news from the other newspapers they own in Ohio to fill in the dispatch. They have very few reporters. And they just announced that they're going to do away with the Saturday newspaper. Now, it's very interesting because here's the Saturday newspaper for the Columbus Dispatch. It's all about the big chip plant, the big Intel plant that's going to come to Ohio. And it strikes me, well, that's interesting because 2 months from now, when they do away with the Saturday newspaper, whoa, who will even find out about it? You see, one of the big traditions in Ohio is Friday night football, and then you read about the football game in Saturday's paper. You know, half the community's there. You read about the game in Saturday's paper, and now they've moved the deadlines up in all these places where they own newspapers in Ohio, including my hometown of Ashland. So now you can't read about the high school football game in Saturday's paper because the deadline is 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So this kind of sense of community that newspapers used to help build is quickly going by the boards.
But last question for Jack Hartman. And by the way, thank you so much for joining us in the neighborhood. And everybody go to, I'm going to get your website, johnkhartman.com, and also the columbusfreepress.com to read your work and
to keyword John K. Hartman. That'd be an excellent. And on the Google, what we call the Google.
But not Google. But if you could, how would you then go to the makers of newspapers and say, here is how and why? Well, we know why. You've said why. Here is how you can go about keeping a ridiculously expensive to print and distribute hard copy publication. Why should they? How could they?
Well, it's a tough question because, a lot of people are very critical of the media. People aren't paying attention. It's all the media's fault. They should make newspapers more interesting. They should make television more interesting, and so on and so forth. The real problem is that increasing numbers of people just aren't interested in learning about their community. They're just not interested. It isn't that the newspapers have done a bad job over the years. It's just the public has changed its interest. The younger generation has a whole different set of interests. There's just so many societal forces out there. There used to be a lot of independent businesses that would advertise in newspapers. Well, now, of course, after the pandemic, a lot of independent businesses have gone under, and a lot of them that were going under even before the pandemic. So the support mechanism for the newspaper was gone. Yet there are situations where nonprofits are taking over daily newspapers, where wealthy people are buying daily newspapers in order to preserve the community and the culture of the community and the communication apparatus of the community. So it may be that that is a better direction than what's happening now. What is happening now is these big companies are buying up newspapers and they're just liquidating them. They're just using them as like a CD. They can get 5% off every kind of a thing. So it's a very and I get nostalgic about the good old days. The managing editor of the Ashland Times-Gazette once told me, he says, television has taken over Cleveland, but in Ashland, we're still the word. And the problem is in most communities now, there is no word.
And see, I come from a culture where in the beginning was the word. And the word was John K. Hartman. Or actually, the website is johnkhartman.com. John, Jack, please come back. I wish we had more time with you today, but we will. I want to get you back on there to talk more about your life, about journalism, about writing. But everybody, please read him at columbusfreepress.com. And thank you. You've just been absolutely delightful. I wish you continued health. Maybe more grandchildren, if that's in the cards. Or great-grandchildren. Great-great-grandchildren. Shalom to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure. Anytime.
Bye-bye now. Shalom.